Anna Katarina Hupflinger. I hope I pronounced that right. Hupflinger is a research and teaching assistant at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich. After completing her PhD in the study of religion at the University of Zurich, Switzerland, she has developed different research projects in the field of media and religion, particularly focusing on the body, clothing, and gender. She's also interested in religions in the ancient world and in European history, in heavy metal and religion, and in charnel chapels. And her paper today is entitled Collect the Blood of Kingu, Mesopotamian Myths in Metal. So Anna, take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this conference. And firstly, I have really to excuse for my very bad English, because in school I've learned Latin and Old Greek and Old Hebrew, but no English. I've learned English through metal songs. So we'll see if I can cope with it or not. And the second thing I want to shortly say is I will speak about Mesopotamian myths in metal, but not in Iranian metal, because I want to draw your attention to the Saturday talk of Pascalina Eckerström about this topic. So we'll see. Now I'll share my screen. I have to look at this. So yeah. Does it work?
Perfectly. Yes, I could see your screen.
Perfect. So please collect with me the blood of Kingu. I will start with these 4 verses from the lyric Blood of Kingu from the Swedish band Therion. And I just quote them first. Collect the blood of Kingu from the great old sea and arrogate the primeval waters inside your veins, the power of the demon flow. Have you ever searched for your descent? Now, this song by Therion refers to the Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish is a Mesopotamian myth written in Akkadian. Akkadian is a language, and found in copies from the 9th to the 2nd century BC. This myth is about the rise of Marduk, not the band Marduk, but the god Marduk. He's a storm god. And I will shortly paraphrase this narrative. So there are 2 gods, a goddess and a god, Tiamat, perhaps in English Tiamat, I don't know, but I spell it Tiamat, and Apsu. And these gods merge their waters. They are both water gods. And then they create some deities. Now, as it is with children, these younger ones are too loud and they disturb the older deities. And therefore, the older ones, Tiamat and Apsu, want to destroy their younger gods and goddesses again. Tiamat creates 11 more deities, of which one is Kingu. And Kingu becomes the commander of Tiamat's army. And then the story ends that Marduk defeats both Tiamat and Kingu. And from Tiamat's body, he creates the world. From the blood of Kingu, mixed with clay, the humans are made. So Kingu here is the ancestor of mankind. And this is what Therion's song alludes to. With this example, I just wanted to show that ancient Near East contents, myths, and texts have quite a significance for metal. Here I just collected some band names. You all know them, I think, from different countries. Now, in the following, I'm interested in why Mesopotamian myths play a surprisingly important role, especially in extreme metal and especially in black metal. Although they are rather unknown in the public or the mainstream culture. And I really want to look on reception history now. Now, to answer this question, firstly, we have to go back into the 19th century. And I want to make really a very brief reception history of Mesopotamian texts. Now, in contrast to the Roman or Greek classical world, the Mesopotamian world was a mystery until the 19th century because the text couldn't be read. So the first decipherment of these texts took place in the early 19th century, and it began really to come into the world in the middle of the 19th century. So cuneiform writings were deciphered around the middle of the 19th century. Cuneiform is a sort of writing system. And here I just want to show one clay tablet from Mesopotamia. It's one of my favorite ones because it's so beautiful. We see here above these cuneiform signs. Here is a map of the world with the ocean, and here's some Mashu mountains on the end of the world. So, but it's not so important what it shows, just that you see how they look, these signs. Now, with this decipherment of these signs, a new world was opened for researchers and also for the public. Particularly relevant was the decipherment of the Gilgamesh epic. It's a very prominent epic in 12 tablets in the main version, where a flood narrative occurs that was clearly older than the flood narrative in the Hebrew Bible in Genesis 6-8. And this gave rise to some voices who questioned the revelation of the Bible. One of these voices was the Assyriologist Friedrich Delitzsch. He was from Berlin, who lectured on the subject to the German Emperor Wilhelm II in 1902, 3, and 4. So these were very prominent lectures in front of the emperor, and the whole Europe spoke about it. It was a topic in caricatures, in newspaper, and so on. Friedrich Delitzsch called for the Hebrew Bible to be removed from the canon of Christian literature, which of course later had anti-Semitic reverberations. It was quite problematic, of course. But these lectures were really prominent. And I want just to show one quote. It's a quote from Mr. Bones. He's an old Lutheran of this time from 1902. And he says, if Delitzsch is right, then a large part of the Bible is fable and myth and not the word of God. Moses a deceiver and Christ a fallible mortal human being like us. So you see, it was in the public, the nation ancient Near East in the public became associated with intention to Christianity or even in contrast to Christianity. This was, of course, a stereotype, but it was a construction that was made here. Now, since then, Mesopotamia and all these Mesopotamian narratives have been forgotten mostly in the public again, but they are not forgotten in metal. And I think that's really interesting. As we have seen, Mesopotamian myths, symbols play an interesting role in metal. They are used to name bands, for lyrics, logos, images. I will focus here now on some lyrics. And now in part 2, I want to ask how these lyrics are used and what are the sources of metal. Again, I want to look on reception history. I think we can distinguish two types of reception in metal, in using it's not the right word, but you understand it, in using Mesopotamian sources. The first one, I think, is an adaptation from fantasy literature, occult and esoteric texts. Because already in the 19th century, and increasingly in the beginning of the 20th century, Mesopotamian symbols and narratives were used in spiritualism and occultism of the time. And then again in the 1960s, in the New Age culture, it became became relevant. One example is the Satanic Bible, published 1969 of Anton Sander Lavey. And he presents in his Satanic Bible a list of so-called demons. But this list shows different deities from different religions. among which a number of Mesopotamian gods and goddesses can be found. For example, Ishtar, Marduk, the underworld god Nergal, and so on. Also significant is the reception of the author H.P. Lovecraft, and especially of his fictional book, The Necronomicon. This book is an invention of Lovecraft, but in the context of the reception, especially in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, then this book became reality in the sense that it was written from different persons from different perspectives. And for example, in one version of this fictive book published in 1980 by the Richard Tchaikovsky publisher in Berlin, there we can find a paraphrastic narrative of the Enuma Elish, but mixed with the Lovecraftian universe, with Cthulhu and all those figures. Now, it's very interesting, I think, that some metal bands really refer to this sort of reception of ancient Mesopotamian contents. For example, I'm from Switzerland, so Celtic Frost is, of course, our Swiss band. So here in these 4 verses of the lyrics of Nocturnal Fear, I just quote them. The sleeping Lord awakens, it's Cthulhu here. Tiamat pulls her chains, the blind phantom rages, Azag-Tod howls. Also Azag-Tod is an invention of Lovecraft again. So what Celtic Frost do here is they mix the Mesopotamian contents with the Lovecraftian universe and create here, their own idea of a mythology. And I think that's very typical for at least some bands and their reception of Mesopotamian world. This is also from the view or perspective of metal musicians and metal fans. They debated a lot, I think, at least here in Middle European context. For example, one musician, he wrote me 2011, he said, I'm absolutely sure over 99% of all metal bands get their knowledge about the ancient Near East from the Necronomicon, not even from Lovecraft himself. So I think that's one path how ancient Near Eastern contexts come into metal. But the other one is that bands also make an effort to interpret original texts. This is very interesting because we can ask what are they using as sources. As I have said, these ancient Near Eastern texts have been deciphered lately. So it makes really a difference if a translation is from 1903 or if it is from 2013. And mostly metal bands adopt from early translations. I think the reason is because these translations are copyright free, of course. So I want to show here also one example, a very interesting one. Of course, we have to mention Melekesh. It's the Mesopotamian band. And on Emissaries, in their song Deluge of Delusional Dreams, they refer to a book from Thompson with the title The Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylonia. So in the CD, they write, I quote, these lyrics are based on an original Mesopotamian myth entitled The Seven Evil Spirits. Now we'll look a bit at it. It's interesting. This book of Reginald Thompson, it's a book in different volumes with this title, Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylonia, and he collects very different texts. It's a very early translation from 1903 on. And here we have 5 lines of, say it's tablet 16 in volume 3. And it's a part of a series of prayers against monsters and evil forces. And I just read now Thompson's translation. He says, of these 7, the first is a south wind, The second is a dragon with mouth agape, that none can something. The third is a grim leopard that carries off young something. The fourth is a terrible serpent. The fifth is a furious beast after which no restraint. We see it's very fragmentary, and it's very famous Mesopotamian epic with the title Invocations Against the Seven. Now Melekesh, they use it, they take it, they really receive it, and I've now here marked in blue what they change. I think we'll just hear it, and I'll show you where they sing, so we can read it with Melekesh together. Yeah, until this. So it's very interesting because they change it. But first, as I heard it, I was a little bit irritated because of the shibu. Shibu is an Akkadian word for a sort of snake, and Thompson doesn't translate it with serpent. So why do they use shibu here? What is this? From where do they have their word? And it's easy. Oh, it's perhaps not so easy. Here again, Melekesh's text. And I found a translation, again, referring to Thompson on the internet from an American with the name John B. Hare. He has a nice homepage with the title Sacred Text. It was created in 1999. And here is this plate 16, again, with referring to Thompson, but a little bit translated a little bit different. And here is also the shibu. Now I've marked in red what is equal to Melekesh's version. So I think what Melekesh here makes is they want the original text, they look for a translation, and they make a reception of a translation. It's quite a circular path that they make here. And I think it's really interesting. Now, just to conclude, just some short thoughts about metal in Mesopotamia, because I've talked now about reception history and the reception of Mesopotamia in ancient in metal text. But why? Why is Mesopotamia and Mesopotamian narrative so interesting, for example, the extreme metal or black metal? So we can ask, why are Mesopotamian myths interesting? Now, the examples have shown that Mesopotamian myths are elaborated, they are changed, they are adopted to a specific metal worldview also, especially in extreme metal. I think, in my opinion, the reception in metal is shaped by the history of the discovery of ancient Oriental cultures and the interpretations that went along with them, especially this tradition of reading Mesopotamian texts against the Bible. This still goes on in metal until today. So I think metal reconstructs this idea in receiving the Mesopotamian myths in this sort. Secondly, of course, the reception of Mesopotamian narratives in occultism and esotericism is very important for the metal scene, and also the reception in metal, because this is one part of a context, a metal context. Thirdly, I also think that the old age of the texts is important here. Often Mesopotamian as Sumerian parts are said as one of the beginning civilizations and so on. It's of course a construct again, but this old age, it has a mirror in the idea of time in metal, or in metal culture, because in metal culture also this idea of a diachronic legitimation is very important. You have to have the first demos, you have to be long in the scene, you have to have the right and old t-shirts and so on. So I think this search for old texts has a mirror in a search for metal identity. I would really love to discuss this point with you. Fourthly, in my opinion, the fragmentarity of the texts, as you have seen by Thompson in his translations, is useful for new interpretation, for innovation, and for new imaginations. So the fragmentarity of the texts here makes these texts better for reception. And lastly, I think in the life of humans, there are controllable errors and uncontrollable errors. Controllable errors are, if you want to eat a banana, then you eat a banana. But the uncontrollable errors are those that are questioned. For example, death, war, strong emotions. And metal is occupied with these uncontrollable errors. These uncontrollable errors of life are the themes and the topics of metal, especially of extreme metal. But they are also the topics of myths, and especially the Mesopotamian myths that are turning around death, war, emotions, and of course, the existential questions of human beings, as where do I come from, where do I go? So to turn again to theory and song, the blood of Kingu, that's one of these uncontrollable themes. Where do we come from? Are we gods? Are we demons? What happens? Thank you very much for your attention. And again, sorry for the English.
No, don't apologize. Your talk was amazing and you made such wonderful conclusions. Positive self-talk only. You did great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I have one question for you from Greg right out of the gate. And again, your English was awesome. Your talk was awesome. I learned a lot. So thank you, because I learned today. And this question again is from Greg. In discussing bands, making a decision to go ad fontes and looking at primary sources, you mentioned a fairly old translation from the early 20th century. Is this typical? Does this have to do with things being online in the public domain? And is there anything to be said about older scholarly understandings of these texts that are perpetuated in this material?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's I think a little bit, it's interesting. I won't say it's a problem, but it's interesting because all the texts are, of course, they are born in this idea of the Babylonian era against Christianity, the pan-Babylonianism. So they are full of normative ideas of this world and full also of a positivistic idea of these sort of cultures. That's one problem. And the second one, yeah, I think also, for example, a band, I don't like to mention it, but I will mention it because it's a very problematic band. It's Burzum. They also use Thompson's translation. And they also Varg Vikernes changes it. For example, there is a Suchfisch, a sort of fish in the translation of Thompson, and Varg Vikernes makes a sunfish of it because he doesn't understand it. So I also think these texts are complicated. They need some understanding. But there are also some bands are really trying to have new ways or so. For example, once a band, I just say it here, once a band asked me if I could translate their song text into Sumerian. I don't say if I've done it or not, but so there are bands are looking for possibilities also.
So this kind of correlates with the second question there was in there for if any of these bands use the original language of the found text in their songs. So they're seeking, if they're not speakers themselves, I don't think you could be a native speaker of these languages, right? Because they're older. So unless they're speakers of these languages themselves, they do look for translations. And we have time for one more question before we move on, because we are running a little bit behind schedule. Is it possible to apply the notion of this is from Giordano. Is it possible to apply the notion of Orientalism as developed by Edward Said, or maybe it is better to use a broader term such as exoticism, metal exoticism?
I would
What
love
do you
to
think?
discuss that then in the panel that we have about it, because yeah, I think it's Orientalism. I think it's a sort of Orientalism that is constructing here the ancient Near East in a very black metal way. And of course, in this way, it's a negative, positive, anti-affirmative way of using here the ancient Near East. Yes, of course. It's, in my view, Orientalism. Yeah.
Also, people were curious about your email, if they could email you their questions later, because we're running out of time for this chat. We have to move on, but thank you so much. You did such a great job. And I loved everyone's presentation so far.